Everyone ignored the quiet alien girl. One human offered her half his lunch. The food tray slipped from Marcus Hale's hand before he even reached his table, and every head in the cafeteria turned. Not because of him. They never looked at him. They turned because Vise had flinched at the clatter, and watching a Seltari flinch was apparently the most entertaining thing on offer that Tuesday. Marcus picked up the tray, steadied the bowl of synthetic rice, and looked across the massive hall. 200 students from 14 species, eating in their tight little clusters, and every single one of them had already turned away from her again, like she was furniture, like she was a smudge on the wall. She was sitting at the corner table, the one near the waste disposal units where the smell was worst, and the lighting flickered every 40 seconds. She had her ration capsule open in front of her, and her 4 upper limbs were folded flat against her body in a way that Marcus had never seen before but understood immediately. It was the posture of someone trying to take up as little space as possible. He had been at the Interstellar Coalition Academy for 9 days. He had learned 3 things. First, the food in Sector C was better than anything else on offer. Second, nobody talked to the humans unless they needed homework help. Third, nobody talked to Vis at all. He changed his direction and walked toward her corner. He had no grand reason. His mother would have done the same thing. His grandmother definitely would have, and probably would have also brought the alien girl a casserole dish she never got back. He sat down across from her. Her ridge markings, the bioluminescent lines that ran from her temples down to her collar, flashed a rapid sequence of pale blue alarm signals. Her 4 eyes locked onto him with the focused intensity of someone expecting an attack. He said his name wrong because he had looked up the Seltari greeting the night before and clearly mispronounced it. She blinked. He pushed half his rice bowl across the table toward her without any ceremony. "Half is yours if you want it," he said. "I always order too much." She stared at the bowl, then at him, then at the bowl again. "I cannot eat that," she said. Her coalition standard was careful and precise, each word chosen like she was walking across ice. "The biochemistry is incompatible." "I know," Marcus said. "I just wanted company." The silence that followed was long enough that the cafeteria lighting completed one full flicker cycle. She had no idea what to do with that sentence. He could see it on her face, or whatever expression meant on a face with 4 eyes and shifting light patterns along the jaw. "What do you want in return?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. She sat very still, her ridge markings cycled through a pattern he could not read. Something complicated and fast, like a storm passing over water. Then, barely perceptible, she gave a single nod. They ate in silence for 20 minutes. Her capsule, his rice. He did not push. She did not flee. It was, in the accounting of the cosmos, a very small thing. It became their table. Marcus showed up the next day, and the day after, and every day that followed. He never announced it. He never made her feel like a charity project. He brought his homework or a battered paperback novel from Earth, and occasionally narrated something absurd happening across the cafeteria in a low, dry voice that seemed to confuse her at first, and then, very gradually, did not. She began arriving at the same time as him. He noticed but said nothing about it. She started talking in small doses, careful and precise. She told him she was a scholarship student under the Coalition's new integration directive. She was the first Seltari ever to attend the academy. At home, her family considered it an honor. Most of her cohort considered it a betrayal of Seltari tradition, which held that other species were tolerable from a safe distance, and better from a greater one. She was not sure which side she agreed with anymore. He told her about growing up in a small city in northern England, where it rained 9 months of the year, and everyone complained about it constantly but somehow still loved the place. She found this statistically irrational, he agreed. What she did not tell him, not yet, was that the first month had nearly broken her. The isolation was not just social, it was physical in a way that species like his never quite understood. Seltari ridge markings were not decorative. They were emotional output. When she was ashamed or afraid or alone, they dimmed, and she could not stop them from doing so, and everyone could see it, and that made it worse. For 31 days before he sat down, her markings had been nearly dark at every meal. She began cataloging his behavior with the quiet precision of someone who could not stop being a scientist. He smiled at the cleaning staff in the corridors. He held the wide double doors open for a 4-legged Keth student who had both forelimbs full of materials. He learned the name of the Vreth student who worked the recycling station and used it every time he passed. None of these interactions gave him anything. No status, no favor, no social elevation within any group. He received nothing, and seemed entirely unbothered by this. She told him one afternoon that his behavior was, by measurable standards, statistically anomalous social expenditure. He laughed so hard he nearly knocked over her ration capsule. She did not understand why, but noted that the sound was not unpleasant. The day he walked into the corridor outside the library and found 3 members of the Vreth student delegation doing what passed for social exclusion in their culture, which was standing in a solid wall across the corridor and refusing to move, he did not do what she expected. He did not demand they move. He did not report them. He did not square his shoulders or raise his voice or do any of the things that would have registered in the coalition's social hierarchy as a formal challenge. He walked up beside her, stood close enough that they were a clear unit, and started telling her about a bizarre entry in the xenobotany chapter he had been reading that morning, loudly, cheerfully, like the wall of Vreth students was an interesting piece of background architecture. The confrontation required an audience to function. Without one, it was just 3 large amphibious students blocking the hallway, while a human talked about carnivorous fungal colonies to an alien girl who was trying very hard not to let her ridge markings do anything embarrassing. The Vreth students moved. She asked him afterward what his strategy had been. He said he did not have one. He had just wanted to tell her about the fungal colonies. She told him that was reckless and irrational. He agreed completely. Her ridge markings flickered in a pattern he was beginning to learn meant something like amusement, though she would have denied it vigorously if asked. The integration forum was announced 6 weeks into the semester. Every year the Academy hosted it, a formal event where student representatives from each species gave a short address on their experience of cross-species study. It was prestigious. It was politically charged. It was, as far as Marcus could tell, the kind of event where everyone said the correct, careful things, while meaning something completely different. Vis was the Celtari cohort representative, which was simple enough, because she was the Celtari cohort. There was nobody else. Marcus was selected as the human sophomore representative, which was less simple, because there were 11 human students currently enrolled, and the selection process involved 3 rounds of voting, 2 arguments, and 1 student dramatically withdrawing from consideration. He found her in the common room the night before the forum. Her ridge markings were nearly dark. She had received a communication from the Celtari diplomatic consul. The terms were clear. If her speech praised integration, she would be considered politically compromised at home. If she remained neutral, she would be seen as snubbing the coalition on their own stage. Either choice closed a door. She was standing in a corridor with no exits and watching both walls close in. He listened without interrupting, which she had noticed humans could do when they chose to. When she finished, he asked her one question. What is actually true? Not what the consul wants. Not what looks good for the coalition. What did you actually experience, being here? The common room was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, 2 students were arguing about course credit in a language that clicked. She said, very carefully, that the academy was the most frightening and most important thing that had ever happened to her. She said the first month had felt like standing in open space with no suit and no anchor. She said she had been close to requesting a transfer home. She said that someone had sat down across from her at the worst table in the cafeteria, with food she could not eat, and had asked for nothing in return, and that something had changed after that, in a way she did not yet have the right words for. Say that, Marcus said, exactly that. She told him it would be politically catastrophic. He said that was probably true. He also said that things which were catastrophic when spoken were usually things that needed saying. She looked at him for a long moment. Her ridge markings did something they had not done in his presence before. They settled into a slow, warm, steady amber glow. No flickering, no cycling, just continuous and quiet and still. He looked it up later in the Celtari cultural database. Steady amber meant gratitude too deep to express with language. She gave the speech. She stood at the podium in front of 400 students from 19 species, and she told the truth. She described the isolation in terms that were so precise and so honest that the air in the hall shifted. She described the cultural vertigo of being the only one. She described 31 days of nearly dark markings. And then she said that a human student had sat down at her table and offered her half of a meal she could not eat, and had wanted nothing in exchange except company. And she said, I had been taught that kindness without transaction is a form of deception. I now believe that is the thing my people got most wrong. 7 seconds of silence followed. Marcus would look that up later too. In Celtari tradition, a 7-second pause after a spoken statement means the audience has heard something that changed them. The Vreth delegation applauded first. He genuinely did not see that coming. He found out later that honesty spoken at personal cost was the highest social value in Vreth culture. Vis had delivered precisely that, and they recognized it instantly. Even though her honesty had been partly about them, The cafeteria did not transform overnight. The species clusters did not dissolve. The corner table was still near the flickering light and the smell. But the next morning Marcus arrived to find Vis already seated, and beside her, 2 seats away, one of the Vreth students from the corridor. His name was Gures. He sat with the rigid posture of someone doing something unfamiliar and choosing to do it anyway. Marcus slid him a napkin with a hand-drawn map of the cafeteria's better food stations. Gures stared at it, then folded it carefully and put it in his jacket. Vis showed Marcus a message from her mother that afternoon. 3 lines. He could not read Seltari script. She translated without expression. Her consul was angry. Her father was proud. Come home in summer and explain the human. He laughed. Her ridge markings went amber again, briefly and without comment. By the end of the week there were 4 of them at the corner table. Marcus, Vis, Gures the Vreth, and a quiet Keth exchange student named Orev, whom Gures had apparently simply picked up on the way, because kindness, it turned out, was not a species-specific instinct. It was a learnable behavior, and once someone demonstrated it clearly enough, others recognized it, even if they had never had a name for it before. Marcus looked out across the cafeteria one morning while Vis walked him through a xenobiology problem set and Gures drew a diagram of Vreth constellation mapping for Orev, who was fascinated by navigation. Not one of them could eat each other's food. None of them cared. He thought about what Vis had said the night before the speech, about being taught that kindness without transaction is deception. He thought about how every species at the academy had a different word for what he had done that first day. The Vreth word translated to something like dominance overture. The Keth word meant resource signaling. The Selthari had 3 separate terms for the concept, and all of them carried a warning note. Humans just called it lunch. He thought that might be the whole thing. The most remarkable thing a human could do was not endure the impossible, though humans did that too, often and loudly. It was not the stubbornness or the war-making or the refusal to accept a closed door. Those were real, but they were loud. The quiet thing, the thing no other species had quite figured out, was the ability to sit down next to someone the rest of the room had decided to leave alone, and act like that was the most normal decision in the world. Because to humans, it was. It always had been.